Broadcast is brought to you by the Parliamentary Broadcasting Unit in partnership with the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation. In the order of business for the National Assembly this afternoon, 2 cabinet secretaries are expected to appear before the National Assembly at the plenary sitting. This is the Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Forestry, Soipan Tuya, as well as the Cabinet Secretary for Roads and Transport, Kipchumba Murkomen. And this is according to, or rather pursuant to the provisions of the Standing Order 42A, subsection 6B, that is on the notice of question, where members will be asking questions to the cabinet secretaries who will be appearing on the plenary sitting this Wednesday afternoon. There are a number of members that have various questions to these cabinet secretaries. The member for Elgeyo Marakwet, Honorable Caroline Ngelechi, will be asking the cabinet secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Forestry to explain the rationale behind the ban on maize cultivation in plantation, establishment and livelihood improvement schemes, commonly referred to as PELIS areas. The member will also be seeking the cabinet secretary to explain why there is a massive decrease in forest cover percentage in Elgeyo Marakwet County despite the ban on maize cultivation under PELIS, as well as explain the pros and cons of maize cultivation under the PELIS system and clarify whether the area residents can revert to the initial maize cultivation in PELIS areas. That is the questions, or rather those are the questions that the member for Elgeyo Marakwet, Honorable Caroline Ngelechi, will be posing to the Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Forestry, who will be appearing before the plenary this afternoon. The member for Mandera South, Honorable Abdul Haro, will also be asking the Cabinet Secretary for Environment to clarify whether Kenya has ever experienced any heat waves in recent years and provide details on the impact of these episodes on humans and livestock. The member for Mandera South will also be asking the Cabinet Secretary to provide the status of any records maintained on critical heatwave events experienced in the country and clarify whether such records have been used to provide disaster warnings for purposes of adaptation strategies. Again, the member for Mandera South will be posing a question to the Cabinet Secretary on what measures the ministry has taken to mitigate the impact of heat waves on human life and the livestock in the country. Those 2 members have their questions lined up to be asked to this Cabinet Secretary in today's order of business. That is the Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Forestry. The Cabinet Secretary for Roads and Transport, Kipchumba Murkomen, is also set to appear before the National Assembly plenary sitting this afternoon and will be answering various questions from a number of members of the National Assembly. The member for Machakos County, Honorable Joyce Kamene, will be asking the Cabinet Secretary for Roads and Transport to outline the measures the ministry has put in place to provide for pedestrian footbridges along an approximately 2-kilometer stretch of Mombasa Road, especially the crossing at Hilton Garden Inn and the Syokimau Railway Station, Nairobi SGR Terminus, and the stretch between Kappa Industries and Mastermind. The Speaker of the National Assembly, Honorable Dr. Moses Wetangula, is in the chambers. He will be presiding over this afternoon sitting. Allow me to hand you over to this live broadcast that is brought to you by the Parliamentary Broadcasting Unit in partnership with the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation. Good afternoon. My name is Kamche Menza.
Mheshimiwa, tuombe. Ewe Mwenyezi Mungu ambaye kwa hekima na wema wako umetoa nyadhifa za viongozi na mabunge kwa ustawi wa jamii na utawala wa haki wa wanadamu, twakusihi utazame kwa neema nyingi sisi watumishi wako ambao wameridhika kutuita ili tutekeleze shughuli muhimu za jamhuri yetu. Twakuomba uteremshie baraka zako sisi tuliokutanika hapa, na utujalie tuyatende na kufikiria mambo yote yatakayofikishwa mbele yetu kwa njia ya haki na uaminifu, ili utukufu na sifa zako ziendelezwe, na ili kustawisha amani, ufanisi na heri ya nchi yetu na wale ambao haja zao umezikabidhi mikononi mwetu. Amen. Sergeant, you may ring the quorum bell.
Well, pursuant to provisions of the Standing Order 34, subsection 1 and 2, that talks on the quorum at the commencement of the House, is that a quorum of the House or of a committee of the whole House shall be 50 members. If there is not a quorum present when the chair is taken at the time appointed for a meeting of the House, immediately after the saying of the prayer, the Speaker shall order the bell to be rung for 10 minutes. And if no quorum is present at the expiration of the 10 minutes, the Speaker may direct that the bell be rung for a further 5 minutes. And if there is still no quorum present, the Speaker shall adjourn the House fort. Well, the quorum has been achieved before the lapse of the first 10-minute quorum bell, the Sergeant at Arms has indicated. So allow me to hand you over to this live broadcast. Good afternoon.
All honorable members, we now have quorum. Kirui.
Order number 1, administration of oath. Order number 2, communication from the chair. Order number 3, messages.
Next.
Order number 4, petitions. Order number 5, papers.
Majority Leader.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers on the table of the House today, Wednesday, April 19, 2023, the afternoon sitting. 1. Legal notice number 29 of 2023 on the value-added tax, electronic, internet, and digital market supply regulations 2023 and the explanatory memorandum from the National Treasury and Economic Planning. 2. Legal notice number 30 of 2023 on the excise duty, excisable goods management amendment regulations 2023 under the explanatory memorandum from the National Treasury and Economic Planning. Legal notice number 25 of 2023 relating to the National Cereals and Produce Board National Strategic Reserve Regulations 2023 and the explanatory memorandum from the Minister of Agriculture and Livestock Development Office of the Cabinet Secretary. 4. The report of the Auditor General and financial statements on Ngong Technical Vocational College for the year ended 30th June 2021. Monetary policy statement for October 2022 from the National Treasury and Economic Planning. 6. 2022 post-election economic and fiscal report from the National Treasury and Economic Planning. And 7. Reports of the Auditor General and financial statements in respect of the following institutions for the year ended 30th June 2022. A. Petroleum Development Fund, Ministry of Energy. Women Enterprise Fund, Occupational Safety and Healthy Fund, Micro and Small Enterprise Authority, Council for Legal Education Staff Car Loan and Mortgage Scheme, Office of the Controller of Budget, Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority Staff Mortgage and Car Loan Scheme, Prison Industries Revolving Fund, Revenue Statement, State Department for Interior and Citizen Services, Revenue Statements for State Law Office and Department for Justice, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, State Department for Youth Affairs, State Law Office and Department of Justice, Commission on Revenue Allocation Staff Car Loan Scheme, Office of the Controller of Budget Staff Mortgage Scheme, State Department for Gender, National Land Commission Staff Car Loan Scheme Fund, Equalization Fund, European Widows and Orphans Pension Fund, National Treasury, Asiatic Widows and Orphans Pension Fund, National Treasury, Development Revenue Statements, National Treasury, African Union and other international organization subscription fund, National Treasury, Consolidated Fund Services, Public Debt, Treasury Fund, Promotion of Youth Employment and Vocational Training Phase 2 in Kenya Law Number BMZ 2018-65-120 State Department for Vocational and Technical Training, Multinational Drought Resilience and Sustainable Livelihoods Programs in the Horn of Africa, ADF Loan Number 210015002835 State Department for Crop Development and Agricultural Research. And lastly, towards ending drought emergencies, ecosystem-based adaptation in Kenya's arid and semi-arid rangelands, IUCN grant number P02886, State Department for Livestock. I thank you, Honorable Speaker. I beg to lay.
Thank you, Majority. Honorable members, I'll go back to order number 2. Honorable members, allow me to recognize a delegation from the National Defense College of the United Republic of Tanzania. I wish to introduce to you a delegation from the National Defense College of the United Republic of Tanzania. The delegation comprises 9 members from the United Republic of Tanzania, both faculty and course members, 1 faculty member from the People's Republic of China, and 4 course members each from the Republic of Malawi, the Republic of Namibia, the Republic of Rwanda, and the Republic of South Africa. They are as follows. Some of the names are long and difficult. Number 1, Commodore Bagachwera Trasias Rutambuka, leader of delegation. Number 2, Ambassador Robert Kainunula Vedasto Kahendaguza, senior directing staff. Number 3, Brigadier General H.E. Kongnian, senior directing staff. Number 4, Major Mwinyikombo Ali Mwinyikombo, Administrative Coordinator. 5, Brigadier General Hosea Maloda Ndagala, Course Member. Colonel Emmanuel Kanobaire, Course Member. Colonel Justus Mwilambege Kita, Course Member. Colonel Evarist Richard Ngaila, Course Member. Colonel Stephen Ramorwa Mogale, Course Member. Group Captain Engelhard Jinahona Koujo, Course Member. Colonel Luca Nixon Eric Kamanga, Course Member. Senior Assistant Commissioner of Fire Goodluck Zeleto Urio, Course Member. Mr. Leonard Alfan Mwambungu. Mr. Ahmad Sufyan Ali. The delegation is accompanied by Lieutenant Colonel S.C. Langat, Senior Escorting Officer from the Kenya National Defense College. Honorable members, the delegation is on a one-week study tour aimed at exposing the officers to practical issues related to sociopolitics, the economy, foreign policy, and security in Kenya. On my own behalf and that of the National Assembly, I welcome them to the House of Parliament and wish them fruitful engagement during their stay in the country. I thank you. Honorable members, we are cascading towards question time. I'll direct the rearrangement of the order paper slightly so that we skip order 7 for now and go to order 8 so that we can put the question before we come back to order 7. Clerk.
Order number 6, notices of motion. Order number 8, special motion, consideration of nominee for appointment as chairperson of the Kenya Fish Marketing Authority. Question to be put.
Honorable members, you had exhausted the debate on this motion and the mover had replied. So I now put the question, which is that taking into consideration the findings of the Departmental Committee on Blue Economy, Water and Irrigation in its report on the vetting of a nominee for the appointment as the chairperson of the Kenya Fish Marketing Authority, laid on the table of the House on Wednesday, 12th April 2023, and pursuant to the provision of Section 201(1)(a) and 2 of the Fisheries Management and Development Act 2016 and Section 8(1) of the Public Appointments Parliamentary Approval Act 2011, this House approves the appointment of Honorable Martin Otieno Ogindo as the chairperson of the Kenya Fish Marketing Authority. As members of that opinion say aye. Will those of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. We go back to order number 7. We have a raft of questions listed on your order paper.
Order number 7, questions and statements.
Honorable members, today we will be having 2 cabinet secretaries. The Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Forestry, the Honorable Soipan Tuya, and the Honorable Kipchumba Murkomen for Roads and Transport. We will start with the Honorable Soipan Tuya, who is in the House. Minister, questions will be asked. You have been in this House, so you need no unnecessary tutoring. The member will ask question, you will answer. Then they will follow 2-3 supplementaries. Depending on how well you convince the House, we'll leave it there. If they'll incessant supplementaries, it means you are not convincing them enough. Let's start with question 069 of 2023. The member for Elgeyo Marakwet, Honorable Caroline Ngelechei.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a question to the Cabinet Secretary. Could the Cabinet Secretary please explain the rationale behind the ban on maize cultivation in plantation establishment and livelihood improvement scheme, that is PELIS? Explain why there is massive decrease in forest cover percentage in Elgeyo Marakwet County despite the ban on maize cultivation under PELIS. 3, explain the pros and cons of maize cultivation under PELIS system and clarify whether the area residents can revert to the initial maize cultivation in PELIS areas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first allow me to commend the House for such an opportunity to be able to have an interaction with the legislature. I have been a member of this House and a chairperson of the committees, and I know the onerous task that chairs struggle with when they are put to task on questions that they have no first-hand experience on. Mr. Speaker, to go straight to the question raised by the honourable member for Elgeyo Marakwet, also to commend the questions that have come before the ministry for being very pertinent, and those that touch on matters of great concern to the public. Mr. Speaker, this being a specific question centered around the county of Elgeyo Marakwet, in the area of forestry management, first is to say that Elgeyo Marakwet forest ecosystem has 10 gazetted forest stations, namely Cherangani, Cheptongei, Kapiego, Chesoi, Elgeyo, Kesup, Sabor, Kaptagat, Penon, and Kipkabus, and 4 sub-counties, as is known to this House. Mr. Speaker, in terms of the productive areas covered by plantations in Elgeyo Marakwet, we have a total of 12,615 hectares under plantation, and this is commercial plantation, which will be pertinent in answering this question. And we have 78,185 hectares under natural forests. Mr. Speaker, coming to the question on what's the rationale behind the ban on maize cultivation is, first is to say that the plantation establishment and livelihood improvement scheme, PELIS, is a practice that is undertaken as non-resident cultivation and is provided for under law, under the Forest Conservation and Management Act. And this is a practice that only happens within commercial plantation areas and not indigenous forests. The Forest Conservation and Management Act, number 34 of 2016, in its sections 48, 49, and 50, speak to the issue of community participation in forest conservation and management. And this, read together with the Sustainable Management Rules of 2009, afford communities adjacent to forests the opportunity to practice non-residential cultivation, which is using of forest land that the communities adjacent to forest do not own, but they can cultivate for a maximum period of 3 years. Mr. Speaker, this is in the spirit of involving forest adjacent communities in the management of forests for purposes of sustainable management of our forests, because we cannot do that effectively without involving the forest adjacent communities. Mr. Speaker, the law states that the Kenya Forest Service may enter into a written agreement with a community forest association to allow its members to engage in the non-resident cultivation. And as I said, this only happens in commercial plantations. The law further provides that the Kenya Forest Service may not allocate a plot within an important water catchment area or a source of spring or on a slope exceeding 30% inclination or within 30 meters on either side of a river course. So in that, Mr. Speaker, again, the law is very clear on when the non-resident cultivation is allowed within our plantation forests. Mr. Speaker, for the information of the House, the Kenya Forest Service is in charge of 2.59 million hectares of forests in this country. Of these 2.59 hectares, 94%, which is about 2.3 million hectares, is indigenous forests. And the remaining 6%, which is approximately 150,000 hectares, is commercial plantations. And plantations, the rationale for having commercial plantations within gazetted forests is to provide a buffer or cushion to indigenous forests from exploitation, and also to provide the timber and other wood products that are required for the timber industry in this country, and to also generally deflect attention and demand of forest products from indigenous forests. And these commercial plantations are generally found at the periphery of the indigenous forests. And again, I want to underscore that the pellis that the honorable member is asking about only happens within plantation forests. The Kenya Forest Service, in line with its Rule 58 of the Forest Participation and Sustainable Forest Management Rules, is required that before the issuing of a cultivation permit, to issue comprehensive operational guidelines to avoid any abuse of communities having activities within the commercial plantation areas. The cultivation permits that are issued are subject to certain conditions, which include planting only of annual crops that are approved by the service. And with that, in return, the communities would be required to render assistance to the service in beating up or replanting, whichever may be appropriate, in cases of low survival rates of seedlings, as well as controlling any illegal forest activities, preventing forest fires, and with this, the communities are not allowed to either lease or sublet or sell their allocated plots for the practice of pellis. The other very important guideline is that for any communities allowed to do the pellis practice within forests, they are only to use hand tools for land preparation and not erect any structures on the plots allocated except with the written permission from the service, and this is only in areas with high incidences of game damage. Mr. Speaker, in the year 2000 is when we had the ban on maize cultivation within plantation areas, and this was largely informed by the abuse and subversion of the guidelines that are supposed to guide the process of PELIS, which is a delicate process. And therefore, the banning of maize plantations, one of them was found to be that the maize grows very fast and covers young tree seedlings, thus reducing the growth rate of the tree seedlings due to shedding. And thereafter, the retarded tree seedlings were often chopped during maize harvesting by the employees of the PELIS farmers, thus resulting in poor forest plantation establishment. And due to the above, then the Kenya Forest Service banned the plantation of maize in the PELIS areas. That was in 2020. After the ban, Mr. Speaker, it was established that it actually did hamper the main intention of allowing PELIS in forest plantations, which was to encourage participatory forest management. Therefore, it affected negatively the establishment of new plantations. After the ban, we had an en masse abandonment by communities of plots that had been allocated to them for cultivation in the PELIS arrangement. And this was more pronounced in the Mau, the North Rift, and Western conservancies. Mr. Speaker, also due to the ban, the cordial relationship and cooperation between the communities and KFS was greatly affected, and this resulted, as I say, in the community participation in tree seedling, planting, and growing, and the taking care of the forests, as had been the practice. Given the foregoing results, Mr. Speaker, the Kenya Forest Service, after careful consideration of the negative impacts on the ban of maize growing in plantation areas, particularly on establishment of commercial forest plantations, approved the re-inclusion of maize amongst the crops that can be grown in PELIS areas, while putting in mitigation measures to allow for the negative impacts of intercropping maize with the plantations that caused the ban. Mr. Speaker, this was done by a Kenya Forest Service Board of Directors resolution in April of 2023. Mr. Speaker, moving to the next question, which is that the honorable member seems to be correlating the supposed massive decrease in forest cover percentage in Elgeyo Marakwet County, because the question says that why is there a massive decrease in forest cover percentage in Elgeyo Marakwet County despite the ban on maize cultivation under PELIS? I will say in the onset that from our own observation, there is no correlation between the forest cover with the maize cultivation issues under PELIS. Because, Mr. Speaker, according to the Forest Conservation and Management Act of 2016, in Section 8, the Kenya Forest Service is required to prepare a forest status report for the Cabinet Secretary every 2 years, and also to prepare a forest resources assessment report every 5 years. Can I proceed, Mr. Speaker?
Lord, proceed.
So, Mr. Speaker, there is that requirement for the service to provide a forest resource assessment report every 5 years. And according to the first National Forest Resource Assessment report, which was done in 2021, Elgeyo-Marakwet County has a forest cover of 20.53% and a tree cover of 29.95% respectively. And there has not been any further scientific assessment report with regard to the forest cover. So at the onset, Mr. Speaker, I cannot speak to the variance that the honourable member is alluding to until we have another scientific assessment which will give us the forest cover variation in the county. However, Mr. Speaker, we have tabulated the areas under PELIS in the county of Elgeyo-Marakwet for the last 3 years, and what it projects in the year 2020 to 2021, the total area under PELIS is 1,400 hectares. 2021-2022, the total area reduces to 954 hectares, and currently the 2022 to 2023, it further goes down to 910, which corroborates the argument from the Kenya Forest Service that indeed the trend from when the ban on maize plantation was done has drastically reduced the area under PELIS within Elgeyo-Marakwet County. So it is indeed a disincentive to those communities adjacent to the forest in Elgeyo-Marakwet County. The last question, Honourable Speaker, speaks to the pros and cons of maize cultivation under the PELIS system and clarification on whether the area residents can revert to the practice after the ban. Mr. Speaker, maize is a very important crop in Kenya and forms key staple foods, one of the key staple foods in most communities in the country, and therefore contributing to the food security in Kenya. The Kenya Forest Service Board, taking into consideration the data on forest cover of plantation forests under PELIS when maize was being grown, and plantation forest cover under PELIS after the ban, approved the maize growing under PELIS, and this has since been effected through the KFS management. Mr. Speaker, in this regard, I stated that the main problem and challenge with the PELIS system in general, beside the maize plantations, is the abuse of the process, which therefore requires very stringent enforcement measures. And in this regard, we have put in place a program to sensitize community forest associations across the country in various conservancies. And we have held several meetings, the first one of which was in March of this year, and we have subsequent meetings planned, Mr. Speaker, because you know that one of the flagship projects of the government of the Kenya Kwanza is the restoration effort through planting of 15 billion trees, and we need the goodwill of the communities, and particularly forest adjacent communities, for this to become a reality. We as a ministry are also planning to actively engage the CFAs in participatory forest management meetings going forward, and assisting them to come up with forest management plans that will conform to the regulations and the confines within which the PELIS practice will happen. These engagements, Mr. Speaker, are part of the government's plan, as I say, to ensure that every stakeholder is fully involved in our mission to grow our tree cover by to up it to 30% by 2032. I take this opportunity to urge this Honorable House and members, through you, Honorable Speaker, to help take the leadership role and guidance as we protect our forests to curb the menace that is the climate change crisis that we are faced with. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Honorable Ngeleche, before you ask your supplementary, honorable members, allow me to acknowledge in the Speaker's Gallery, Kamwira Boys School from Kirinyaga Central, Kirinyaga, and in the public gallery, St. Mother Katori Secondary School in Manyata, Embu, Vicodec School from Kajiado North, and Mountain View Academy, Namanga, Kajiado South. On my behalf and your behalf, I welcome them to the House of Parliament. Now, Ngeleche, ask one supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, let me appreciate Madam CS for adequately responding to my questions. She indeed is realistic because she's able to know that the ban on cultivation of maize actually brought the negativity and the constraints between the KFS and the surrounding community. I would wish also to promise that we are going to continue cooperating with KFS to ensure that farmers are not going to abuse the process. We also welcome the engagements by KFS with the local community to ensure that we work harmoniously, since this is going to indeed help to increase the food security in the county. I don't intend to ask more questions because I have my members of parliament from Keyo North and Keyo South, and I would wish to them some few minutes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You have nothing to donate, Honorable Ngeleche. This is question time. Musa Sirma. Musa Sirma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm speaking as a professional forester in this house, and I think that is the only part. I don't have another partner in this house about it.
I'm here. Why did you say so?
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Minister, the CS, for the bold move she has taken in reintroduction of the Shamba system. This is the only way we can establish plantations. I want to ask the CS to go a bit further. You cannot be able to succeed in establishment of forest when you still have the new policy which was brought in before she came in of tree first. You must prepare the land. Even if you want to plant maize, you cannot plant on grass. Equally, trees are a crop, and it is the same crop we are expecting to harvest at a longer time. So I want to urge the Minister to remove the issue of tree first and prepare the land adequately so that we have a very high survival count of trees in our forest. Otherwise, I would like to laud the reintroduction, because it is going to bring food security, or to be able to provide food for Kenyans, also provide income for the people who are living near the forest. As they tend their crops, they will be able to plant the trees. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Keyo South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I applaud.
She has been
CS.
louded enough. Ask your question.
Thank you. Having come from the community which is adjacent to the forest, I'm really thankful for the decision that she has made as a ministry. However, there are some mature trees which needs to be harvested from the same forest. And we understand there's a circular from the ministry that the sawmillers have been allowed to harvest the same trees. My question to the minister is, will the local community benefit from the same harvest, or it will just go to commercial sawmillers? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well done. Bukose Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the CS for responding to those questions, although I know the question was a little bit overtaken by events, because already people are working on their farms. My question, Madam CS, is that many of those stations have officers who have worked there for many years. And these officers have actually been engaging even in corrupt activities, where they sell some of those plots for people to be able to acquire. What are you going to do to make sure that we now have people, not communities adjacent to the forest, accessing those plots without them paying something to the officers who have been there long enough and engaging in corrupt practices? Thank you.
Beatrice Elachi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also want to thank my sister and our CS for indeed a good job she's doing, and not just that, looking at how we are in the environment, my question goes back to the same Shamba system, that indeed, while I appreciate the system, the CS to ensure that also those who are going to work around those forests are communities that live within those forests, that you'll ensure nobody comes from outside and now starts there a home, and yet they were never part of that area. So it is important just to put in good regulations that the Shamba system is for those who are within the area. And important is to even give the area coverage of how what they need to do and how they need to work around the forest, and also to conserve the rest of the forest. Thank you.
Honorable Tongoyo. Minister, get ready to answer those.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Also, I want to take this opportunity to commend the CS for appearing before the House and articulating well the question asked. I've got two questions, Mr. Speaker.
Only one.
Two, please.
Only one. I've given you room to ask one supplementary.
Okay, I was trying to weigh on which one is more. Okay, one is I want to ask a question whether the CS is aware that Ngareta Forest, which is part of the Mao complex, is being encroached and grabbed by very highly placed individuals, and also to tell us probably the plan that the government is taking to protect the forest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Omolher. Give her the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to thank the Madam CS. Honorable Speaker, I and Madam CS studied in the same school. Our school, high school, was the Kenya High School. The Kenya High School. And our able clerk here, Wanjiru Ndindiri. Honorable Speaker, our motto was Servire est regnare, meaning to serve is to reign. I just want to say here that we are here to serve and to rule, Honorable Speaker.
Honorable
I just want to...
Order. Honorable members, this is not time for heaping accolades on ministers. It is question time. and you are here to ask questions that concern your constituencies or the country, so that you can help the ministers or guide them to give answers that help the development and growth of the country. If you want to praise each other, we'll give you room out there to go and do so.
Honorable Speaker, I just felt we are here courtesy of that. I'm guided, Honorable Speaker. My question is, now that the drought season is over and we have the rains, what plans does the CS have for added counties, especially Mandera County, or plans on tea planting and afforestation? Thank you.
Well done. That's all I expected you to do. Minister, can you answer those?
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. And I want to thank the honorable members once again.
Those that were comments, Minister, you pass.
I will pass, yeah.
Just answer the questions. Because many of them were just comments.
Yes. The Honorable Sirma, on the question of trees first, regulations, we are working on that with the recognition that indeed for the high survival rate of seedlings, there is need for preparation of land. So we are alive to that. KO South MP, yes, we have overgrown plantations. Of the 6% commercial plantations that I spoke about, which have largely been affected by the ban on logging, which has been on since 2018. And for the information of the House, the ban on logging is lifted on 5,000 hectares of land, which consists of overgrown and overmature plantations. And this only applies to harvestation of commercial plantations, which I explained that they form 6% of our forest under the Kenya Forest Service. And yes, following guidelines of an Auditor General report, which followed the discussions around the ban on logging, there is a proposed arrangement to make sure that the local communities who play custodianship to forests are not left out in the allocation of plantations. Honorable Pukose, yes, the issue of plots, there is a nominal fee that communities have to pay, which is about 300 shillings per plot. Very minimal. But we are, keen. The whole PELIS process requires high-level supervision and enforcement to ensure that no abuse comes in between. And following on to Honorable Elachi's question, which is to ensure that actually PELIS only applies to forest adjacent communities. It's not a commercial enterprise. It is not a free-for-all. It is only forest adjacent communities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Madam CS, you've not actually responded to my question. I asked, what are you doing to the officers who have overstayed in those forest stations that they now behave as if they own land, and they are the ones now who decides on who gets and who doesn't get. And I think it's a corruption that is at the root.
Thank you, Honorable Pukose. The staff establishment of KFS is actually of concern. We know the amount of destruction, illegal activities within forests going on. And one of the issues is to make sure that as we allow for, in forest activities, that will go hand in hand with a human resource audit to make sure that KFS is actually the one tasked with the 15 billion trees initiative. And if we have issues with the staffing, then it's going to compromise that. And therefore, following the recent recruitment of rangers and that which is going to follow for forest officers, indeed, the issue of human resource audit is one that is of paramount importance to make sure that the enforcement of the law is adhered to the full. I was on the question by the Honorable Elachi that yes, it's only the forest adjacent communities that are eligible for PELIS, but also to say that from the regulations, we only allow for hand tools. I know previously with the abuse of the PELIS process, you would find people getting in with tractors. That we will not allow. Just like I said, that this only is allowable within commercial plantation areas. The Honorable Tongoyo, yes, I am aware of, I have a report on my desk on the issue of Ngareta Forest in Mao, and it is a matter that is under investigation, and action will follow once we establish the extent of or any attempted encroachment of the Mao forest. In fact, the Mao forest is 40% fenced, and it is a priority of government to expedite the fencing of the remaining 60%. And therefore, just like all the other forests in this country, my ministry is keenly watching and taking action to make sure that we are not saying we plant 15 billion trees and other people are moving back to destroy that which we have. The question by the Honorable Member for Wajir County. Yes, indeed, we have an elaborate plan on the tree growing because of the government flagship project on the 15 billion trees. And Wajir County, Mandera, we have earmarked the arid and semi-arid lands. That is where we have the biggest space in community forests. We have done a segmentation of this country and mapping to know where we have available land beside the government protected forests. We have targets set out for different players because, honorable members, for us to achieve the 15 billion tree initiative, it is an all hands on deck. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, my ministry is in engagement, among other players, with the national government CDF board to request the members of parliament through the board that the 2.5% of CDF that is earmarked for environmental conservation should be expanded in scope, because, honorable members, we are within an existential threat of the climate change, and we all have to take our space in contributing to the climate action. And we have established that the earmarked funds for CDF are very limited in scope to the extent that it's just the purchase of seedlings. We are making a proposal to the NGCDF board that members would be able to shift with government. We are shifting from just planting to actually planting and growing and seeing the trees through to maturity. And you cannot do that if you cannot employ some labor. And therefore, our request is that the NGCDF board would allow for proposals from members of parliament to actually engage our young people in a concept we are calling the Green Army, to help us not just plant, but actually grow the trees. And I hope, members of parliament, you are going to support us in that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On that question, I'll request for 3 other supplementaries. KO East, 1 question. KO South, KO North, 1 question. Sorry, Kipkelion East. Sorry. Kipkelion East, 1 question. KO North, 1 question. And Honorable Farah Maalim. That will be the end on that question. There's a next question on environment as well. Okay, start. Kipkelion East. Give him the mic.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, because of time you have given me. Mr. Speaker, I have a question to Madam CS concerning forest in our area, Kipkelion East, where I represent. And I want to ask Madam CS, my constituency actually covers around that 6.6% of forest in area of Kericho County. And I grew there within Sogel Forest. And when I was growing, there were people who were tending those trees. And we had a lot of seedlings. But since sometimes back they were fired and they were kicked out of the forest, and right now we have a very big empty space. What are you doing to make sure that we have enough seedlings? The other day, I tried to drill water for Londiani Forest College so that they can be able to have tree nurseries. In addition to that, Madam CS, those locals who have been actually working on those forests and also living within the forest, they find themselves when people are doing the logging or when the sawmillers are being awarded, only big four sawmillers are given tenders to come and clear the plantations, and they only remain with the sawdust. I want to ask, what are you going to do to make sure that the locals who have been taking care of those trees do benefit from that, especially our youth? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Asante sana Mheshimiwa Spika. Swali langu kwa waziri ni kwamba ni kuhusu uhusiano mwema kati ya maafisa wa misitu na wananchi. Nauliza hivi Mheshimiwa Spika, manake kuna visa vingi ambavyo vimeendelea, wamama kupigwa, vijana kuumizwa. Hivi majuzi kwa chini ya miaka 7 hivi nimepoteza vijana 3. Na ya mwisho ilikuwa mwaka jana ambapo vijana 2 waliuawa na maafisa wa kulinda msitu. Ni jambo gani ambalo analifanya kama wizara kuhakikisha kwamba wao wanakuwa na nidhamu na kufanya kazi kwa njia mzuri? Ya mwisho ni kuhusu miti, Mheshimiwa Spika. Kuhusu miti, Mheshimiwa Spika.
Swali moja nilikupa nafasi. Farah Maalim.
Mr. Speaker.
Question.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I want to draw the attention of the Minister that I come from the DAP constituency, where we have at peak times in excess of 450,000 refugees. And those refugees are not given any energy by the agencies, the UN being primary among them, for them to do their cooking. So they depend on depleting the environment. Has your ministry considered the catastrophe or the calamity that is ongoing there, and as far as the degradation of our own environment is concerned? And what do you plan to do in consultation or also in coordination or even forcing the agencies to make sure there is energy available for the refugees to cook their food instead of having to go and cut the trees in that very fragile, limited ecosystem? Thank you.
Thank you. Waziri, answer those 3. We got the next question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The first question by the member for Kipkelion East, addressing the issue of seedlings. Actually, Mr. Speaker, just to say that one of the immediate tasks that we need to engage in as a ministry in the realization of the restoration initiative is to do a massive seedling propagation exercise. We have many seeds within the Kenya Forestry Research Institute, and what remains is the propagation of seedlings to meet the good demand that we are already seeing and feeling where Kenyans are ready to plant trees. They are ready to partner with government in restoration efforts. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, to say we are capitalizing on commercial forestry. We want to do mass production of fruit trees through agroforestry so that there would be value in individual Kenyans partnering with us in the planting of trees. And the target, we will do a target of women groups, youth groups, who we know are fully engaged in nursery propagation, and they need to be registered with the carefree so that we can work with them. Honorable Speaker, also to say to the Honorable Member, recently in a partnership with the Ministry of Water, because we have a an interministerial team that is undertaking the tree growing exercise, there is a fully fledged borehole within Londiani. It's quite new, and we are going to, through the support of the college, to do massive seedling propagation, and we are going to engage youth and women within your constituency. On the issue of only big sawmillers profiting or benefiting from the allocation of permits for the plantations harvesting, like I said, we have a proposal from a process that had been done through a multi-agency task force, which proposed that the issuance of permits should actually be in the range of 60-40%. 60 going to locals and 40% to others. And Honorable Speaker, locals would be, in many instances than not, the small-scale sawmillers. So I will oversee that to make sure that this acts as an incentive to the forest-adjacent communities to partner with the Kenya Forest Service in protecting our ecosystems. Honorable Speaker, the member for Keyo North on relations between KFS officials and the communities around the forests, I said that my ministry have already had several meetings with community forest associations in the spirit of ensuring good relations between the service and forest adjacent communities. And therefore, there'll be little or no tolerance at all to acrimony, because that will sabotage our efforts. We need the support of the communities, and any case that comes up will be dealt with a proportion of action that is required. And it is an issue that I will look into to make sure that any such specific cases will be dealt with. Honorable Farah Malim, this is a very pertinent issue at a time when we are looking at the nexus between climate change and migration issues. But Honorable Speaker, through you, I would wish to take time to investigate the issue of the impacts of the refugee camps on the environment degradation. And I have my Director General here of NEMA. And with your permission, Honorable Speaker, in the next 2 weeks, we can do a written response to the issue, because it is of concern to the ministry as well. Thank you.
You write to the clerk, and he'll pass on the answer to the honorable member. Next question, 104 of 2023, member for Mandera South.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I rise to ask question 104 of 2023. Could the Cabinet Secretary, 1, clarify whether Kenya has ever experienced any heat waves in recent years, and provide details on the impact of these episodes on humans and livestock? 2, provide the status of any records maintained on critical heatwave events experienced in the country, and clarify whether such records have been used to provide disaster warnings for purposes of adaptation strategies. 3, what measures has the ministry taken to mitigate the impact of heat waves on human life and the livestock in the country? Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Minister, I want you to take less than 10 minutes on this.
Most obliged, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, once again, a very pertinent question in the wake of the climate change crisis. And just to let the honorable members know that climate action is of high priority for government through my ministry. The President chairs the Africa Union Committee for Heads of State on Climate Change. And this September, we shall be hosting the first of its kind climate summit to address some of the issues that are rising, which are becoming a livelihood threat to not only Kenyans, but the global community. Mr. Speaker, heat waves have a very loose definition, and they are defined as periods of hot weather considerably above the average temperatures for a given time and location. And the threshold given for a given location or geographical area largely depends on the local weather conditions, the vulnerability of the people, and ecosystems exposed to heat. Honorable Speaker, it is likely that a number of perceived extreme heat events will occur in regions of the country as temperatures continue to rise in response to climate warming, with thresholds varying regionally. Mr. Speaker, if members have had a time to peruse some of the annexures to my response, they will see a tabulation of projected risks and impacts of climate change on human life, also the risks pertaining to health, and also pertaining to food security and even animals. Mr. Speaker, with regard to the issues raised by the honorable member, in Kenya, like many other sub-Saharan African countries, extreme heat events and attributed impacts such as emergency room visits, hospitalization, human and livestock deaths, and loss of productive hours are not documented, and heat waves are not recorded sufficiently. And few studies have attempted to assess changes in heat waves in various African regions. However, these fragmented studies do not provide succinct and comprehensive information for the necessary decision making. Weather conditions that could result in health risks depend on the sensitivity, acclimatization, and adaptability of the population to extreme heat. And temperatures is the main component of heat, and it also depends on various weather variables.
Okay.
Coming to the exact question on whether Kenya has ever experienced heat waves in recent years, research into heat waves across the world has confirmed that the increasing trends in frequency, duration, and cumulative heat have accelerated since the 1950s due to the climate change. The biggest increases have been seen in the Middle East, South America, and Africa. And they project the deadliest disasters that are getting stronger and more frequent every other day. In the recent past, Honorable Speaker, heat wave events have been recorded around the world, with examples of 3,000 people dying in the United Kingdom, 300 displaced in Italy, 600 people dying in Spain. Mr. Speaker, chronic exposure to extreme heat in the form of seasonal and year-round extreme heat, especially in tropical regions, have far-reaching impacts on health, productivity, and economic outcomes. Generally, public perceptions and awareness of heat in Kenya are very low, and there is therefore need to raise the awareness of heat risks, especially in this country, where we have a substantive number of low-income populations. For instance, due to lack of awareness, heat-related instances and illnesses might have people underestimating these illnesses and the seriousness of heat situations, and do not actually then go to hospital when they are required to go. Based on analysis of data from 1975, the year 2022 was the third warmest year on record, tying with 2021, and followed closely behind by 2019 and 2020 as the first and second warmest respectively. Intrigued by undocumented heat waves, cases and concerns of their impacts, our Kenya Meteorological Department recently conducted research to identify high-risk regions, define heat thresholds, and initiate a protocol to operationalize heat wave early warning in Kenya for early action and for purposes of informing adaptation strategies. This analysis showed that recently identified extreme heat events occurred in Kenya in March 2016, April to May 2019, March 2020, and February of 2021. The extreme episode of March 2016 lasted for at least 7 days, with impacts including increases in admission in hospitals in the cities of Nairobi, Kisumu, and Mombasa. Another study carried out in 2022 identified extreme heat events of 1991, 2005, and 2012 over Nairobi, Tana River, and Turkana counties respectively. And most heat events recorded in the selected counties were observed to begin around the months of February to March. The study concluded that owing to the established direct relation between extreme heat events and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease prevalence, the observed events ranging from normal to very extreme have had a great negative impact on human respiratory health. Mr. Speaker, I now wish to inform the House on the link between climate change, heat waves, and drought, also known as climate change, heat waves, drought nexus. The impacts of recurrent droughts in arid and semi-arid regions of Kenya continue to worsen, with significant impacts on lives, health, losses in livestock and livelihoods. And it is highly likely that droughts are coupled with heat in these regions, and increasing trends in temperatures have been observed in recent times. Mr. Speaker, sir, these issues highlighted do compound dry events, heat waves, and droughts, and they change dramatically under global warming, but have never been systematically studied in Kenya. However, it is feasible to state that the livestock deaths associated with long drought were spurred by extreme heat stress on the animals brought out by heat extremes, high evaporative demand that results in low soil moisture and decreased surface water availability. The need to understand the compounding risk posed by the combined effects of droughts and extreme heat events, especially in arid and semi-arid areas of Kenya, is dire. Mr. Speaker, extreme heat events interact with other factors such as exposure and vulnerability and inadequate adaptive capacity, resulting in greater impacts. The associated impacts of extreme heat events on livestock are negative psychological effects of heat stress on animals' metabolism and productivity, and indirectly via increased disease burden, reduced water availability, and inadequate pasture. Mr. Speaker, with regards to the question, to provide the status of records maintained on critical heat wave events experienced in the country and to clarify whether such records have been used to provide disaster warning. I will say, Mr. Speaker, that the World Meteorological Organization concluded that the past 8 years were the warmest on record globally, fueled by ever-rising greenhouse gas concentrations, accumulated heat, according to 6 consolidated international temperature data sets. Mr. Speaker, the year 2022 was the 8th consecutive year between 2015 and 2022 that annual global temperatures have reached at least 1% above the pre-industrial levels. And in view of this, Kenya started monitoring heat waves from 2022. This monitoring was likewise spurred on by an analysis done in the generation of the annual State of the Climate document, which is annexed in this presentation, Mr. Speaker. And in the initial analysis carried out, examined daily data from 1991 to date and identified the following thresholds for issuing heat health alert warnings in Nairobi, Kisumu, and Mombasa, respectively, based on the historical data record. And the thresholds for Nairobi, Mr. Speaker, is that the daily maximum of 32 plus for 3 or more days then would account for a heat wave. In Kisumu, a daily maximum of 37 plus degrees Celsius for 3 or more days would equally be the threshold. And in Mombasa, a daily maximum of 36 plus for 3 or more days would also form the threshold. These heat waves identified in the historical record are all documented as described in the above section with regard to the 3 counties. As previously outlined in the KMD, KMD is working on expanding the threshold to cover many other regions in the country, which would eventually then speak to the adaptation measures required. Additional research and studies are crucial, Mr. Speaker, to determine the impacts of heat waves and other climate change phenomena on livelihoods in Kenya. In its seasonal forecast, the Meteorological Department of Kenya incorporates temperature forecasts for various parts of the country, and these serve to prepare stakeholders and the public for either high or low temperatures during the seasons. Mr. Speaker, on the 4th question, which is the measures the ministry is taking to mitigate the impacts of heat waves on human health and livestock in the country, Mr. Speaker, in arid and semi-arid regions of Kenya and in Africa at large, livestock species, particularly sheep, goats, and cattle, are typically a major source of livelihood and survival and source of food and may be converted to cash. It supports livelihoods, Mr. Speaker. And with the change in the heat seasons, there is increased vulnerability. This therefore calls for an urgent need to develop effective adaptation strategies, including increased uptake of emerging technology, such as the Zai pits, which are planting pits that provide water-efficient farming technology and are often used in arid and semi-arid areas to maximize water utilization by crops. Mr. Speaker, on the part of the ministry, several measures to mitigate the effects of heat waves on both human and livestock in Kenya have gone into place. The first is that the Kenya Met Department has adopted the Common Alerting Protocol, standard developed by the World Meteorological Organization to issue early warnings on the onset of events such as floods and strong marine waves, which then provide advisories for the affected communities, be it fishermen, pastoralists, and other communities. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the KMD is in the process of implementing and operationalizing impact-based forecasting, which will serve to support evidence-based decision-making for extreme weather events such as heat waves, both in advisory form as well as in updates and forecasts. And together with other sectors, including water, energy, health, and disaster reduction, KMD is developing thresholds of weather and climate variables to trigger response and action. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, the ministry is currently developing the National Climate Change Action Plan, which includes adaptation and mitigation strategies that respond to various impacts with regard to heat increases. Number 4, Mr. Speaker, is the partnership that the Meteorological Department is involved with Resurgence, a development partner, on a project called Daraja, where there is regular issuance of temperature forecasts, including warnings for informal settlements. And examples have been developed for Kibra and Madare based on collaborative thresholds on collaboration. These thresholds are disseminated via text messages to communities and also radios such as Pamoja FM. And this is, the focus emanates from the fact that these informal settlements are largely impacted disproportionately by extreme heat conditions. Mr. Speaker,
Wind up.
The fifth intervention, Honorable Speaker, is that the ministry is in the process of modernizing the Kenya Meteorological Department infrastructure so that the department will be in a position to better monitor weather events. And this improved monitoring network will be the basis for development of local scale threshold to detect extreme heat episodes for early warning. And at the opportune time, Honorable Speaker, we shall be reaching out through the relevant committee of this House for the support of the House to actually help modernize and fully equip our meteorological department by turning it into a semi-autonomous government agency that can stand on its feet to respond to the need for scientific-based approaches to early warning systems for us to alleviate the effects of heat waves and other such impacts of climate change. Mr. Speaker, sir, that is one of the biggest needs within the KMD that I know will specifically be followed through the House of Parliament. In terms of recommendations, Mr. Speaker, yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm just about to finish. There is immediate need for measures to be put into place to cushion Kenya from heat waves, and one of which is to support the modernization of the Kenya Meteorological Department. And also, through this information needs to go out to our hospital managers and medical practitioners to pay particular attention to the effects of heat waves on Kenyans. And finally, Mr. Speaker, for the hardest hit regions of northern Kenya, the need to take up specific measures to mitigate against heat waves, including reduction of movement of livestock during extreme weather seasons, reduction of transportation of animals, and focusing only on movement during cooler hours of the day. And of course, Mr. Speaker, the need for alert, for people to stay alert to signs of heat distress, including panting, increased respiration rate, increased water intake, so that people can then get the necessary help. With those presentations, Mr. Speaker, I conclude. Thank you.
Member to ask the question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I think I am satisfied. Thank you, the Honourable. Thank you, the Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Member. If you are satisfied, the story ends there. Thank you very much. Minister will release you. Call in the next minister. Thank you very much. Honorable members, allow me to acknowledge in the Speaker's Gallery Taita Mauche Secondary School from Njoro, Nakuru, Kisumu University's Student Association from Kisumu, and in the public gallery, Makuma High School from Mara in Taraka, Jack Ridge School from Ruiru, Kiambu, and Samoei Boys School from Nandi Hills, Nandi. On your behalf and on my own behalf, I welcome the students and their teachers to Parliament. The Honourable Minister for Roads and Transport. Sergeant, is the minister in the building?
Yes.
The first question by the Honorable Joyce Kamene. She has requested. What is this? Yes. Is she here? Okay. Is Joyce Kamene in? Yes.
There was the one.
Minister for Roads and Transport, welcome the House of Parliament. Joyce Kamene, you may ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand to ask the Cabinet Secretary of Roads and Transport. Question number 018/23. Could the Cabinet Secretary outline the measures the Ministry has put in place to provide for pedestrian footbridges along an approximately 2-kilometer stretch of Mombasa Road, especially the crossing at Hilton Garden Inn and the Syokimau Railway Station / Nairobi SGR Terminus, and the stretch between Kappa Industries and the Mastermind?
Minister, you have 9 questions, and we must be done with you by 6. By 6. So I want you to give us succinct, short answers pointed to the question. There may be supplementaries that may give you a latitude to wander around, but I want pointed answers to pointed questions. Go ahead and answer the first question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to appear before this august House to answer these questions. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, we have 9 questions, but it shall appear later. I will demonstrate that the 9 questions are subsumed to 3 topics, and therefore the rest of the issues that are related to pending roads can be collapsed and answered together. Mr. Speaker, on this particular question, Allow me, Mr. Speaker, to appreciate the honourable member for this question, Honourable Joyce Kamene, and to note for the good of the House that indeed we have a challenge in the country when dealing with matters related or touching on pedestrians. Statistics from NTSA, Mr. Speaker, show that we lost 1,383 persons who are pedestrians, 1,557 and 1,682 in the years 2020, 2021 and 2022 respectively. It is, Mr. Speaker, saddening that we continue losing lives as a result of lack of infrastructure and sometimes recklessness on the road. The reasons are because of inadequate facilities for non-motorized traffic, including cycling and footpaths. In this case, the Ministry has prioritized incorporation of non-motorized transport as part of national transport policy. All new roads now, Mr. Speaker, being constructed will have in place footbridges, cycling paths, and footpaths. Under Kura,
during the demonstrations of Maandamano at that particular time. And as we have stated earlier and before, we've at this point we've encouraged bipartisan talks to be tabled on this floor, unlike the kind of demonstrations that took place that have ended up making us lose lives for our wonderful Kenyans who are working so hard to be able to bring a living on table. And yet what happens at the end of the day, because of these particular demonstrations, then they end up losing their lives, Mr. Speaker. So it is at this particular time that I really support Honorable Gataya, Senator of the Rakanidi, because he's here supporting also his people, and as Kenyans we back him up, and we want this matter tabled very urgently. The county commissioner, Tharaka-Nithi, should be able to very fast give this committee the report of the young man who is soul arrested because of the demonstrations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Karungo Dangwa.
Mr. Speaker, I was warned when that petition came to the House, to the committee, that Buxton issue is a hot potato. Mr. Speaker, the Committee of Housing, Roads and Housing, we saw we have to make sure that the people of Buxton get what is theirs. The county government of Mombasa, the developer of Buxton Estate, must give the people of Buxton, the former residents, Mr. Speaker, what is theirs. I stand here as we are progressing on that issue. I'm a bit worried why the same issue is being requested in another committee, Mr. Speaker. We are on progress to give the people of Mombasa what is theirs. Mr. Speaker, I request you, so that we do not have games that are played within this House, Mr. Speaker, that matter continues and you can give us a joint sitting together with the JLAC, Mr. Speaker, because we have to follow and make sure that the people, the former Buxton residents, get what is their own, Mr. Speaker. Why is the matter being taken to another committee when we were just about to conclude, Mr. Speaker? That is my issue. That is my issue, Mr. Speaker. What has been taken, what has been seen, who has taken what, Mr. Speaker? Mine is to ask those two committees, we sit down together so that we can listen to that issue and conclude this matter, Mr. Speaker. Otherwise, after JLAC has taken the matter, another committee on land will come again, Mr. Speaker, and they say they're talking about land. Then after land, a matter of tourism, Mr. Speaker, they will say Mombasa is a tourist county. Let the matter go to the tourist committee, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let this matter be handled, if not by both committees.
No, you know, majority rinda cheriot. No. Wanaongea na wale. Okay. I gave the mic to majority leader a long time ago. What happened? I gave you the mic, the floor.
Oh, sorry. You know, Mr. Speaker, Senator Kajwang should allow me to prosecute the point first, and I'm sure you'll give him, because it's not very usual for him to be around at this hour. So I was wondering. I was wondering what is coming up, Mr. Speaker. I don't know whether it is this Buxton issue. You know, Mr. Speaker, having been in this house long enough, I know that when you see a matter making rounds from one committee to the other, transcending one parliament to the other, because it's not the first time that Buxton is before this House of Parliament, then there is a chance that there is more than meets the eye. Mr. Speaker, I don't know what has informed the decision, but I am concerned by the comments by the chair of Transport Committee. Mr. Speaker, we should trust our committees. If a competent committee of this House is handling a particular matter, I feel that it is only respectful to the membership of that committee and to us as a House that we allow them the requisite time to conclude on a particular matter before moving it to another committee, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, I stand to support the chairperson of Committee on Transport, Land and Housing, Mr. Speaker, that if indeed they were already handling this matter, then they should be allowed to conclude on the matter. Once they have brought the report, should the House hold the view that either a particular matter hasn't been fully addressed or there is reason to believe that the committee did not carry out its responsibility properly, then the House can be moved to think otherwise. But I find it wrong that any committee of this House, when handling a particular matter, midway, that matter is taken and given. It doesn't matter if a member coins a question in a different saying, oh, you know, if we start encouraging that kind of movement, and I have no ill will against any member bringing the matter before the House, but I feel maybe what Senator Chute brought is proper before the House, Mr. Speaker. But then that particular matter should just have been added as additional matters for the committee to find out, Mr. Speaker. So I don't know what informed the decision to take it to a separate committee, Mr. Speaker. But I hold the view that whatever supplementary question are brought, so long as it relates or even has the slightest of similarity to a matter that is before any committee of the House, and it doesn't matter which committee, we should trust our committees of the House, Mr. Speaker. That's my point.
Senator Betty Montet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I rise not to talk on the hot potato, but to support the statement sought by Senator Mofire. Mr. Speaker, sir, the issue of demonstrations in this country has always been handled very badly. The issue of demonstrations are not illegal in this country. We've seen deaths resulting to these demonstrations, while wananchi are always there trying to just pass a message to the government or to the relevant authorities if they are not taking